If we have no other brags, then I'll turn it over to Josh to introduce today's program.
Yes, so our program today is Rod Diridon Sr. He's joining us from the Rotary Club of San Jose. He's also a member of the Rotary Climate Action Council. He's going to give us a presentation on climate change. Let me read you his bio. From 1993 to 2014, Rod Diridon Sr. was Executive Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute, a transportation policy research center created in 1991 by Congress. He is known as the father of modern transit service in Silicon Valley and has chaired more than 100 international, national, state, and local programs, most related to transit and the environment. He frequently provides legislative testimony on sustainability. Mr. Diridon was appointed in 2001 and 2005 by Governors Davis and Schwarzenegger, respectively, to the California High-Speed Rail Authority Board, of which he is Chair Emeritus. He's past chair of the American Public Transportation Association and a founder of the APTA High-Speed Intercity Rail Committee and National High-Speed Rail Corridors Coalition. He served as president of the National Council of University Transportation Centers and was elected chair of the U.S. High-Speed Rail Association's board. He served for 6 years as North American Vice Chair of the International Transit Association in Brussels. In 1976, he chaired the state's first successful local half-cent sales tax for transit and subsequently co-chaired a statewide and 4 successful regional transportation financing and bond elections. Fortuitously, in 1996, he founded and chaired the Transportation Research Board's study panel, Combating Global Warming Through Sustainable Transportation Policy. He advised the Federal Transit Administration and in 1995 chaired the National Research Council's Transportation Research Board's Transit Oversight and Project Selection Committee. He provided keynotes, especially on sustainability and climate change in more than 50 US cities and for a dozen international conferences, and has published numerous related articles. In his younger years, he was an avid bicyclist and had driven electric cars since 1996. His home photovoltaic array is a net contributor to the grid. He's past chair of the region's League of Conservation Voters and a Life and Mirror Society member of the Sierra Club. He received Lifetime Achievement Awards from the APTA, CUTC, National Association of Counties, San Jose State's College of Business, UHHS Ground Transportation Association, U.S. High-Speed Rail Association, Regional LCB, and others. His political career began in 1971 as the youngest person ever elected to the Saratoga City Council. He retired in 1995 because of term limits after completing 5 terms, 6 times chairing both the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors and Transit Board. He's the only person to chair the San Francisco Bay Area's 3 regional governments: the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, the Air Quality Management District, and the Association of Bay Area Governments. He chaired 9 successful rail system development project boards. In 1995, the region's main train station was renamed the San Jose Diridon Station upon his retirement. He's now focused on combating climate change by convening the Rotary Climate Action Council. As you can see, we are very fortunate to have Mr. Diridon with us today. If you can please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Wow, thanks for that very nice introduction, Josh. My dad would laugh and my mother would believe it. The time to be with you today is really special for me, in that this is my 50th month, my 50th year. May 5th was the day I was invited into Rotary 50 years ago. So I'm celebrating that time with you. If I need to pay a fine, I'll pay the fine. And Julie, you're running a fine meeting. I enjoy watching your success, and you have a very dynamic group. Thanks for allowing me to join you. Claudia's committee, by the way, it sounds like it would be a great committee to run campaigns. How about running somebody for office? Julie, you want to be the mayor? Oh, I don't know. Public service is a wonderful way to go. Michelle's comment about her granddaughter leads me into my talk today, in that I have 4 grandbabies, and they're the most wonderful little people in the world. Without question, they're no rival. They're going to be so much better than I ever was as an adult because of how quickly they're learning and what they're doing. And I want them to have a chance to be successful in this world. Yet at our Rotary Club in San Jose, we hosted the guest speaker, who was Dr. Shapiro, who was the head of the Stanford University Medical School's biology department, internationally respected speaker and a Nobel laureate. And she looked us in the eye and she said, "We are in the 6th mass extinction. It has begun." And she wasn't teasing. She wasn't leading us on. She was stating a fact, which she then shared information to prove. And well, I've been talking about that a bit, but it still shook me right down to my toes because of those grandbabies. And so as I move through the presentation today, which has been given to over 100 Rotary clubs now, as far away as El Paso and Boise and Tacoma and San Diego and so on. It's been vetted many times, so it's all factual and it has reference information. As we go through it, think yourself about those grandbabies, your children and theirs. And let's proceed. Next, please. We've had 5 extinctions in the history of our little round marble in the universe of trillions of marbles. Going back 444 million years ago, as far back as our geologists can go. Last one was 66 million years ago when the big comet hit off the coast of Mexico and off the Yucatan, and it killed all the dinosaurs, and 76% of all life became extinct on Earth. Well, as I mentioned, Dr. Shapiro says we are in the beginning of the 6th mass extinction. Well, the president of the Secretary General of the United Nations says it a little bit differently. He says we have 12 years left before the point of no return, after which the 6th mass extinction will be unavoidable. Yet many of the most serious impacts of that extinction have already come upon us and are irreversible. That includes things like the terrible fires that we're experiencing, the inclement weather that parts of the world are experiencing, the droughts along the equator that have caused serious migration difficulties and so on. So there's the international to local experts suggesting that you might want to pay attention to the presentation. Next, please. Climate change. It's happening now. It's human caused. Some impacts are irreversible already. And we can take action today to limit future warming if we take action determinedly. And this is from NASA. Next, please. The information you're receiving is agreed to by 99.9% of the research scientists that have been published, peer-reviewed scientists. The petroleum company scientists probably don't agree, and they're paid not to agree. But the published scientists that have been peer-reviewed are in agreement with what you're going to be receiving today. 11,000 of those scientists have signed a declaration of emergency and asked all the countries of the world to join them in declaring an international state of emergency and begin responding to climate change as though it were a national state of emergency. Next, please. just so we all know, this is what causes climate change. The sun emits energy in the form of various kinds of rays that cause heat. It comes down to the earth, bounces off the earth, and in the past, most of it's bounced back out into the universe. But in the recent past, a thickening blanket of CO2, other gases too, but primarily CO2, around the earth has allowed that energy to bounce off the inside of that blanket and come back down to earth. So that recycled heat is what's cooking the earth. And that blanket of CO2 is thickening very rapidly now. Next, please. That's a quote you can use if you want to use this presentation out in the community, and it's up to you. Next, please. This is extremely important. This is the foundation of what you're going to be hearing. This is from ice corings through the 5-mile thick ice sheet in Antarctica that has been reviewed, and the research has been done by a team of Russians, Chinese, European community, and US scientists, and they agree on this. They don't agree on the time of day, but they agree on this data. It goes back 800,000 years in that 5-mile thick ice sheet, looking at the teeny tiny bubbles in each year's layer of ice, back to the very bottom of the ice sheet. And it shows that the CO2 buildup in those little bubbles has gone through peaks and hollows through the history, the 800,000 year history of the globe. Those peaks and hollows are warming periods and ice ages, warming periods and ice ages. And there we are over at the right-hand side where the red arrow is currently. We're twice as much CO2 in the atmosphere as any time in the last 800,000 years, and we're 4 times the average of the last 800,000 years now in terms of CO2 in the atmosphere. That's very serious. Next, please. Well, CO2 is being built up in the atmosphere. This is, by the way, was from the front page of the New York Times. Above the fold, it was research done by a combination of highly respected research organization led by the National Aeronautic and Space Administration. And it shows that we were in good shape up until the middle of the 1990s, when everybody came home from the war wanting to drive their own car and wanting to run their own lawnmower and wanting to run their own leaf blower and other kinds of devices that combusted carbon and made it into energy. And so you see that heat, which is the result of climate change, increasing until the last 6 years were the hottest 6 years in the recorded history of the globe. Not a little bit hotter, but dramatically hotter, 2.6 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than any time in the recorded history of the planet. Well, that's going to lead to a disaster if we don't reverse it very quickly. Next, please. So we know we have CO2. We know it's leading to, by the way, I say CO2, it's a lot of different gases, but CO2 is the most prevalent, and it's kind of the marker gas. We know we have CO2. We know it's creating temperature increase. Where's the CO2 coming from? This research was led by the University of California in cooperation with the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, Scripps Institutes, and so on were all involved. Many different Nobel laureates took part in the study. It became a benchmark study. It says that 38% is coming from transportation. 20% is from industry. Well, we have a hard time addressing that. We have to elect the right people, and you folks have done that. Congratulations on your people elected to national office from Oregon. We're doing okay in California, but the rest of the country, parts of the rest of the country are not. But we can't reach industry, but we can reach transportation, electric generation, and electric imports. We can decide what to do about those three, and that's 61%, around 60% of the effluent going into the air that's causing climate change. Agriculture, residential, commercial, those are smaller amounts. We ought to pay attention to them, and congratulations on your garden, by the way. That's a wonderful thing. That's a very important step. But that isn't going to solve the problem. If we don't address the transportation and electric generation issues, we've lost. So let's get on with the presentation and we'll figure out how to do that. Next, please. This is a research study done by Anthony Pearl, Dr. Pearl, president of a university up in British Columbia and chair of the National Research Council Transportation Board. And his benchmark study says that most of it comes from cars. A lot of it comes from air travel, especially short-hop airlines. Short-hop airlines, by the way, are worse than cars in terms of the amount of carbon put into the atmosphere per seat mile. Buses are not good. Diesel-powered buses are not good. But the solution is high-speed rail, light rail, commuter rail, metro rail, electric-powered buses, and so on, electric cars. That's the solution. And we need to get there very quickly. By the way, congratulations to you up in the Portland area on your fine light rail system. It's become a model for the world. Next, please. Here's what's happening. Food production throughout the world is being disrupted. If you look at a climate a map of the world, you see that the equatorial area, the Sierra Desert, and so on, all around the band of the world is increasing in size. And it's causing people who used to live in those areas and survive nicely on agriculture in those areas to migrate because they can't live there anymore. And it also destroys governments. And so the governments can't maintain the peace anymore. And so people are running away from lawlessness and from famine. And of course, they're piling up against the fence at the southern border of the United States. And they're being unwelcomed in Europe, but they're going to come. And as that mass of people increase to the multi-hundreds of millions against those fences, we're not going to be able to stop them. We're going to have to, for humanitarian reasons, even if we could stop them, we're going to have to figure out a way to make them comfortable. The only other thing we can do is to stop this climate change so they can live in their home countries. We're having unexpected epidemics. I don't need to go into that as we're fighting COVID, and we've gone through SARS and all the others. Those are things that we've never addressed before, but are becoming parts of the way we live because of the animals and insects that are migrating with the heat. Water shortage, more land is turning to desert. I've already touched on that. You folks have water. The rest of the world is going to come after your water. And it's going to become very crowded where you live. Unless we can figure out a way to make people comfortable where they live. We have radical inclement weather, wildfires. Goodness, California is burning up. Let me tell you, we're all just scared to death about this fire season because, goodness, there were millions of acres burnt last year. And that was when fire season began in July. Well, fire season has already started in California. And eventually, some of the doubters or scary people are saying that there will be no more forests in California. It'll be a burnt off desert. Well, I won't accept that. And you shouldn't either, because if it happens to California, you'll be next. So let's figure out a way to combat climate change to avoid this terrible future. the polar ice caps, well, we've lost the North Pole. The North Pole, the scientists say, is going to melt. It'll be a big ocean. The South Pole, God help us if it melts. That 5-mile thick ice on one of the biggest continents in the world will raise the height of the water between 100 and 200 feet. Yet it's melting rather rapidly now. So we've got to turn this thing around quickly if we want a life for our children in the future. Next, please. This is a key piece of information. Remember, I mentioned the Secretary General Guterres from the United Nations saying that we had 12 years left. Well, that was 12 years in 2018. So we have less than 10 years. We have about 10 years left now, according to the research that the, what's it called? The Nobel Prize winning Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That was made up of 70 some odd Nobel winners in the past. And they're saying that we have 12 years. We had 12 years to turn it around. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to. And so that's to inject a sense of urgency. I feel the urgency, and I hope you do too. Next, please. This is what that article said on a chart. If we take emergency action now, as President Biden is trying to do, as our Governor Newsom is trying to do, then we'll be on the green line. That green line is extreme emission cuts. It is still uncomfortable. It's much warmer than we have been in the past, but it's livable. If we don't take the action by 2030, then we're on the red line. And that's red line is to oblivion. So my grandbabies and Michelle's grandbabies and your babies don't deserve that. And we're not going to let that happen. Next, please. This is an old friend of mine, a researcher from Stanford, Hal Harvey, and he has the course for us in his next statement. Next, please. He indicates that we ought to transform the power grid and no longer use anything that creates carbon. Have everything electrically powered, have that electricity created by sustainable sources, solar, wind, geothermal. I haven't supported nuclear in the past, but new clean nuclear, the small plants that have been invented are a possibility. They're better than carbon. And we need to make that shift to all electric very, very rapidly. That's what the president's saying. We need to create electric power plants, so sustainably generated and able to transmit the energy through a new power grid very, very rapidly. The energy innovation quote there is from Hal, and he's worth a quote if you'd like to use it. Next, please. Okay, sustainable electricity comes from transportation, by the way. Electrified transportation comes from high-speed rail. You in the Portland area have one that is a higher speed rail, 140-mile-an-hour system coming down from Seattle down through your area. And high-speed rail, by the way, internationally is 300 kilometers or 187 miles per hour. And I understand that there's an attempt now to upgrade your system to that level. But the primary thing is that it's electrically powered. Metro, commuter rail, your light rail system is a wonderful example. Hybrid buses, hybrid cars, hybrid electric buses, hybrid electric cars. As was mentioned in the introduction, I've had an electric car since '96. I've always driven Porsche. In fact, I drove race cars for a short time and in Porsches. And I'm now, and I retrofitted a little red 914 Porsche to all electric in 1996. It weighed a ton, 22 golf cart batteries. It was a pretty pedestrian kind of electric car, but it was wonderful. We now have 2 Teslas. I would say inexpensive little Tesla. Inexpensive and Tesla doesn't go together very well, by the way, but they pay for themselves. They save you so much money that they pay for themselves in savings in a 10-year life cycle. So it can be done. We have solar panels on our roof, so we don't pay anything for transportation. And you can all do it, especially with the new stimulus from the federal government and state governments. Electric manual bicycles, scooters, and walking, by the way. Walking is good for your heart. Next, please. Our homes, solar panels, the new battery packs so that you're completely independent from the grid. And by the way, they can be purchased with a 30% discount from various sources, state, federal, and local. At least in California, you probably have even better ones up in Oregon. Sustainably generated electricity. If you can't put your solar panels on, if you're living in a condo or whatever, you can require that you pay for only sustainably generated electricity, buying it from your aggregators. Home insulation, when you have an opportunity. Eliminate gas heating, fireplaces, and wood burning. That's not necessary. Our fireplaces here are now nice places for potted plants. And you can get that information from your air quality management districts and your transportation. You have a fine metropolitan transportation program in the Portland area that will be able to give you this information. Next, please. And primarily what we're asking is that you create a group of climate change ambassadors in your club who will go through the community with this kind of a PowerPoint. You have permission to, and I hope you use this PowerPoint to make presentations to all of your home and school clubs and your city councils and chambers of commerce and so on, so that they begin to understand how dire the situation is and how they need to take action as quickly as possible. Remember, if it's time to change cars, lease or buy an electric car. Let me stress something, and then I'll stop and take your questions. An electric car, because you buy no gasoline, if you buy commercial electricity, the electricity costs about 30% what it would cost you for gasoline. There is no maintenance. There's no oils, pistons, or other kinds of things, carburetors. There's nothing. There's just a little permanently lubricated electric motor that goes around that makes the wheels go. And so you don't have any maintenance costs. Your typical insurance and registration fees are less expensive because of the electric opportunity. And so when you compound all that savings and you multiply it times 10, it pays for the price of the car. So you're driving free if you keep your car 10 years. And that's not a bad idea. And by the way, they drive a lot better than a gas-powered car. I remember I told you I raced Porsches. My little Model 3 Tesla is faster than any Porsche I've ever come anywhere near. It's faster than my son's Ferrari. And I remind him of that frequently. So it's a good thing to do. And if you can't do those things, then begin praying for a future for your children. Next, please. I think I'm going to buzz through this very quickly so that we get to questions. This is the Bay Area. This is the kinds of things we're going through. Just continue to click through. Rapid transit, the BART system, the yellow line with the commuter rail systems. Light rail is coming in around San Jose and is being built, modeled after your system, by the way, in Portland. And the high-speed rail line is the orange line that goes through the middle. The San Jose station and the Mineta Airport, Diridon Station and Mineta Airport. I argue with Secretary Mineta about this. The train station is a lot better to have named after you than an airport, and he doesn't agree with me. but we have a fun time arguing about that. So that's what we're doing in our area. I'm talking to the choir here, and that Portland's doing it also. You're doing a wonderful job, but keep at it and tell your message to the world, because a lot of the areas are not doing a good job. Next, please. This is the resource slide. If you need information, you can contact any of these people. The web pages are there, and it will help you get the information to support whatever you want to do. Let's go back about 3 slides, Josh, please. Let's go one more back. Okay, let's just stop there, because I want to hear your questions, as long as you have time to ask them. And Josh, I'll defer to you as the moderator now. And if you have questions, ask them. And if not, I have a little comment at the end.
Julia.
Yes, hi. With this pandemic now for over a year, with the world basically being shut down, hasn't that had, a tremendous positive impact on climate change?
Julia, yes, it has had a help. It hasn't helped enough to reverse it, though, because we're still driving cars all over the world. A lot of areas did not shut down, like the United States. India is a prime terrible example. China did a pretty good job, but some of the other areas did not shut down. Russia did not shut down. And so they're still spewing out carbon dramatically. India and China are terrible, especially in the rural areas with their non-muffled and without catalytic converters, petroleum-powered vehicles are just awful in terms of belching carbon into the atmosphere. We've got to shift all of that over to electric power. And by the way, it will happen. It will happen if we get it started, because people realize very quickly that it's less expensive to use electric power, and it's less fuss to use electric power than using petroleum. It's really nice to drive into the garage, plug in your car, and have the car ready to go for 350 miles when you come back out the next morning. And never have to stop at a gas station for either fuel or maintenance again, ever again. Well, maybe you want to stop and pump your tires up, but other than that, never again. So it sells itself. But to get to your point precisely, according to the researchers, worldwide, we saved about 25% of the carbon because of the pandemic. And that will quickly go away now as people come back to work, unless we get them to come back to work in different ways. If we continue to have a lot of people telecommuting, that'll be good. It'll help. If we continue to have more people using mass transportation in the future, that will help. But we can't have them all come back and driving their cars again. Otherwise, we're right back into the terrible condition.
See, Mike?
Yeah, I had a follow-up question on your comments on nuclear. I've been following that also, the Gen 4 small modular reactors and the technology improvements that have been made there. I'm curious, you talk to a lot of people in the field, if you see people's viewpoints changing on nuclear. There's obviously the waste consideration, but the reason I'm asking the question is, if you're looking to replace natural gas and coal for electricity generation or industrial applications, I guess I'm struggling. I don't see there being any other proven technology for base load power as a transition, given that solar and wind is intermittent. Do you see that shifting, or is there still amongst the folks you talk to a lot of hesitance for moving the grid to where nuclear power is at least part of the mix?
Mike, you've touched a nerve with me, and I'll explain why, and then I'll agree with you. For years, I led campaigns against nuclear power, and the old nuclear plants were not real good. Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island are examples of that kind of a situation, and they should not have been built, and I'm glad they're going out of existence. The new plants, though, the new, smaller, much more sophisticated nuclear power plants are ostensibly, and I think it's factual, are much safer. They create a tiny fraction of the amount of waste that has to be disposed of in terms of toxic waste that the old plants created. And the potential for malfunctions is drastically reduced. I've been told this by researchers who don't like nuclear, but are convinced, and who are ready to accept nuclear rather than climate change and the end of the world. So what you're seeing from people like me and others who are opposed to nuclear is that if it's our grandbabies or a nuclear plant, then we're going to take the nuclear plant and save our grandbabies. The difficulty we have is that there is such reticence on the part of the public still against nuclear that they don't see the difference in the new facilities. And so it's going to be very difficult to site those new facilities in a manner that allows us to use the electricity efficiently. Now, there are smaller plants, which means they have to be closer to the use, optimally closer to the use, so that their peaking capacity can be used without the attrition that comes through long distance power lines. And to site those is going to be a difficulty. Now, in your Eastern Washington area, they're beginning to try to do that, and they're doing it also up in Idaho. But in order to get to the issue, we've got to be able to do it next to Los Angeles and next to the Bay Area, and nobody has even begun doing that. So I don't know how we use the new technology very effectively within the 10-year time frame that is so critical. And but I'm ready to say, as a longtime doubter, that the new nuclear plants need to be installed if possible. It's the best I can do, Mike.
I appreciate it.
Paul, I think you had a question, Paul.
Yeah, kind of a follow-up on Mike's question. What about the nuclear waste? And on a smaller scale, what about the batteries in automobiles as they are used up and can no longer be used? What do we do as far as disposal of those car batteries and the nuclear waste?
Well, let's take the nuclear waste first. The nuclear waste on the old plants was vast. You're talking about hundreds and hundreds of tons of nuclear waste that had to be disposed of in long-term dump sites. And that's made significant areas of our Earth permanently toxic. And that's hard to work with. The new plants, though, have a tiny fraction of that amount of waste, according to what I've been told by the researchers. And also, they're trying to develop a procedure for re-refining that waste so that they can reconcentrate the radioactive fissionable material and reuse it, and thereby reduce the amount of waste. So that's the best I could do there, Paul. I'm parroting information that I've received from prior speeches. I've given several speeches to the Boise and Tacoma and that area up there, and they're much more into this kind of research than I am. In regard to the your second item on the batteries, that's an easier one to take because the battery material is really valuable. So when the batteries are used up in terms of their ability to efficiently store, they're going to be going through a re-refining process, and that rare earth components like lithium will be re-extracted from the batteries and reconcentrated and used in new batteries. And so the amount of actual waste that ever has to be disposed of is going to be very small. And they've already set aside a mountain in the middle of the desert in South Nevada that has been hollowed out for a permanent storage area for that kind of waste. But it won't be as much nearly as they thought it was going to be because of the re-refining process. Thanks to Elon Musk, who I think is a nut, but he's a very smart nut.
Jim, did you have a question?
Well, yes. What about China and India?
Yeah.
I understand that China is still building coal-fired power plants, and they supply us with a lot of the batteries and solar panels, but they don't seem to be making any effort at all to improve their air.
Jim, you certainly have come across what might be the Achilles heel for Earth, in that China, not so much China anymore, but India, which is almost ungovernable, is having a terrible time converting to sustainable anything. Their government structure is so tenuous that their government leaders can't take on the status quo without losing power. And the result is that that everything from their little two-stroke motorcycle putt-putts that go around like taxi cabs that are terrible polluters, and their motorcycles and so on, all the way on through to their automobiles and buses. None of them have filters on their exhaust pipes, and they're almost as big as China now in terms of population, and they're creating more pollution than China. China, by the way, is a funny critter. They are trying very hard to reduce air pollution, but they're doing it in a herky-jerky sort of way. They are still building coal-fired plants because they need the energy. They feel that cheap energy is a way of stimulating the economy. But they are inserting now into their coal-fired plants a tertiary treatment system into the stack gases. It's a bag house. They call it a bag house. It's a asbestos filtered thing that looks like a gunny sack that captures particles as it goes out of the big stacks. They have electrostatic precipitators that sprays a film of chemicals into the stack gases that clumps the effluent, and it falls back down, and they scoop it up and then treat it like toxic waste, and so on. So they're trying to clean up the stack gases from their energy plants. And by the way, energy plants are not as bad as cement factories. So they're trying to address both of those. And because China is developing so rapidly now in terms of their, they've got 22,000 miles of high-speed rail. That's more than the rest of the world combined, because it's really good for the economy. And so they're growing rapidly, and they need a lot of cement and a lot of energy. So they're trying hard, and their scientists are telling them that they have to try hard. Our best allies in the world are the Chinese scientists, by the way. They're good. They're very, very good, and they are honest. They're trying to tell that they don't say it on the record, but they're trying to tell their leadership that they want to be the dominant in the world. Well, you're not going to dominate any kind of a world if you continue to create the pollution that you're creating. But I don't know how, so I'm not as worried about China, but I don't know how we reach India. It is just very, very hard. And they don't respond to the kinds of worries that you and I respond to. And you think they would, because they're a kind of a British form of democracy. But so far, they have been impervious to making major changes.
Question, Rod, you bring up the cement plants. Can you expand on that just a little bit?
Yes, cement plants, in order to create the amount of heat, you can't get the amount of heat that's required to break down limestone into cement from electricity. You have to have it from something that burns at a higher temperature. And the only thing they found that does that very efficiently is coal. And so you have vast amount of coal being used by cement factories to break down limestone into the components that part of which is cement. And so every place you have a cement factory, you have a very high degree of air pollution. And the amount of air pollution being added to the climate blanket, the CO2 blanket, is made significantly worse because of the cement factories. Now we have one in Santa Clara County, up in the mountain. You don't see it because it's in the middle of the mountains, but it's a huge crater now of limestone. And we forced them to put in the tertiary treatment facilities that are in the stack gases for the Chinese electric generation plants. And that helps a lot. It cuts down about 80%.
Well, Rod, I want to thank you for joining us today. I think that's all we have time for. But thank you for all that really important and kind of a crucial information that hopefully we all can do our part.
Josh,
if you want to go ahead and close this out.
I'll be happy to. And thanks, by the way, for the heart from some of you and so on. As I mentioned before, I have 4 darling grandbabies, from 9-year-old twins up to 13-year-old is the oldest. And they're very bright, loving, wonderful people, ready to fix the world if we give them a chance. Well, that means within the next 10 years, we've got to curb the trend that is occurring and get the CO2 blanket to begin reducing. And if we are not able to do that, and by the way, at this stage, science tells us it's going to be very hard. If we're not able to do that, 10, 15 years from now, those grandbabies and yours will come to you and look you in the eye and say, Mama, Papa, when you had a chance to save the world for us, did you do all you could do? Well, with tears in my eyes, I'm going to say, yes, I did. What will you say?
Thank you, Rod. Thank you for being here and having this difficult conversation with us, because this is real. This is what we're facing, and these are a lot of the choices that we do need to make. So thank you.